She's like a sickness in my brain, a vision standing by the window pane. She ripples through the blinds and leaves me in a daze. It's in the way her body moves me, the way she grabs me and intoxicates, until the signals in my mind forget to operate. Fragile skull. I take my pleasure from my alcohol. She'll never give you any time at all. She just comes and goes, you know. And she's got me living in a chemical love, and I try to find a...
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another Coffee and Crime Time. Today we're talking about a Jane Doe who remained unidentified for 35 years before her identity was discovered. But this case is a bit different than some of the other Jane and John Doe cases we've covered. Firstly, because there were people out there who were searching for this young girl, people who desperately wanted to know what happened to her and had been actively searching for her. And in a lot of Jane Doe cases, we find that they do go unidentified for so long because no one ever reports them missing. It's also a bit different because in a lot of these Jane Doe cases, even after the victim is identified, so much time has passed that trying to solve the crime, trying to find the person responsible, becomes almost like searching for a needle in a haystack. But in this case, we actually have a good amount of theories and potential suspects, specifically one potential suspect. So before we dive in, there's two things I want to address with you. One, for whoever is still staying with me for the Bonnie and Clyde case, the other part would have already been up by now, except for an issue with a missing memory card, because I already recorded part 7 of Bonnie and Clyde, and I misplaced the memory card. It's a long story. I don't think it was my fault, but I'm going to take the blame for it because it's my responsibility, but it's misplaced. So I have to re-record it over, and due to my schedule this month being very, very booked for the rest of the month, I'm trying to get through the other videos that I have planned before I re-record that one. And hopefully it will be out very soon, either at the end of this month or very early on in April, but I am really sorry. I know that's annoying to have to wait so long. And before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Glasses USA. I have a lot of glasses. It's just kind of my thing now. I'm someone who wears glasses. I've considered getting LASIK in the past, but I'm a baby. I'm terrified of having a laser near or in my eye. And I also really enjoy the variation of looks that being a glasses wearer gives me. And I just don't feel that I even look like myself now without a pair of glasses on. That being said, being a glasses wearer can also get very annoying and expensive, especially if you want to own more than one frame to give yourself some choices. Going to a traditional store to pick out and purchase glasses is such a pain, in my opinion, and I hate doing it, which is why I always put it off for way too long. I go in there, right? I'm faced with walls and walls of frames. I have to walk around, try them on, try to figure out if they work for my face shape, and I'm usually doing this while also trying to make sure that one or both of my kids isn't burning the place down. Then, once I finally just grab a pair because I'm so overwhelmed and I just want to get out of there, I can't find someone to help me because there's a ton of other people in the store trying to buy glasses and only 2 people who are working there. Once I do get to sit down with someone, it's another long process, and then I don't even get to leave with my glasses. I have to wait several weeks for them to be done and made, and then I have to go back and pick them up and wait again and hand over a fortune just so I can see, right? I never feel good about that whole experience afterwards. It's a means to an end. But with Glasses USA, none of these annoyances exist, and buying glasses is fun again. By cutting out the middleman, GlassesUSA.com offers prescription glasses at up to 70% off retail prices. Now you can shop for prescription eyewear online at affordable prices without leaving the comfort of your home. GlassesUSA.com offers over 9,000 styles of eyeglasses and sunglasses, including in-house brands like Muse and Amelia E. And both of those brands, I love Muse and I love Amelia E. But they also offer designer brands like Armani, Oakley, Ray-Ban, Gucci, and many more. You can add almost any prescription to any type of frame, including sunglasses and blue light blocking glasses. And if you're wanting to get non-prescription glasses with blue light blocking coating on them so you can just keep your eyes protected if you sit in front of a computer a lot, that's available too. The thing I am most excited about is the new GlassesUSA.com prescription scanner app. All you have to do is download the free app on your phone, and then you use your phone's camera to scan your current eyeglasses and extract the details of your prescription. It's FDA listed, it's easy to use, and it gives you accurate results in just 10 to 15 minutes, which saves you time and energy because you don't have to make a lot of phone calls and track down your prescription if you don't have it on hand. A complete pair of glasses with frames and lenses starts at just $30, and free basic prescription lenses are included with every frame. All you have to do is place your order and your job is done. The glasses enter production and arrive at your front door with standard free shipping on every order, and if for any reason you're not completely happy with your new glasses, you can return them within 14 days for a refund or an exchange or store credit, no questions asked. So the real question is, what are you waiting for, right? If you wear glasses, you want to wear glasses, you want new glasses, click on the link in the description box and start making your life easier today. So the glasses I'm wearing right now, these are a Muse frame. They're the Muse Marlene. I love them. They have blue in them, so I picked them today to wear with my blue shirt. These are also another favorite of mine. I love the way that they look, and these are the Amelia E. Valentina, and they're in the red color. And then I have these glasses, which I really enjoy because it gives a really cool elongated shape to my eyes. And these glasses are the Muse times Hilary Duff Colette. And then we have these glasses. These, I like to call them my John Lennon sunglasses because I feel like the Beatles when I'm wearing them. But these are also Muse times Hilary Duff, and they're the Susan, and I just love them because they give me such vintage vibes. So whenever I'm wearing, some of my like 50s inspired clothing, I always wear these because they just seem so, vintage to me, and I love them. And I probably have about 20 more pairs. If you guys ever want a glasses tour, like on Instagram or TikTok or something, just let me know in the comments. Thank you so much to Glasses USA for sponsoring this video, and let's dive in to the video. So the fully clothed, partially skeletonized body of a young woman was found on January 28th, 1981 on an old, remote logging road off Highway 157 in the Bellevue area of Bossier County in Louisiana. A father and his 2 children were out hunting when the young kids stumbled upon the body, which was partially covered with leaves. The young woman was thought to have been in her early teens or 20s with dishwater blonde hair. She was about 5'6", between 130 and 140 pounds. She was fully dressed, wearing a beige, long-sleeved button-up hooded sweater, blue jeans, a white bra, men's white briefs, and a woman's style button-up white shirt with thin stripes of blue, pink, and yellow. On her feet, she was wearing white athletic socks with yellow and blue stripes and sneakers that had scribbles on the outside, and the name D. Davies was written on the inside. Now, in relation to the shoes she was wearing, when you read about this case, it's almost always reported in every article I found online that the word D. Davies or the name D. Davies was written inside her shoes. But when I went on newspapers.com and I searched for articles that were written the same year that she was found, articles that would, be much more close to the event, I got a bit more information. Apparently, these were Yvonne Goolagong brand tennis shoes, and the names Michael Briscoe and David Risha were also written on or in the shoes, in addition to D. Davies. Yvonne Goolagong was a famous Australian tennis player in the 70s who won the French Open, the Australian Open, and Wimbledon, as well as 14 Grand Slam tournaments. So these shoes were pretty popular at this time in 1981. They were sold at Sears. Initially, there's not much of a clue there, but it's very odd that there were 3 different names written in or on the shoes. Having one name written on them might mean that she'd been wearing hand-me-down shoes. Maybe she'd borrowed them or picked them up at a thrift store. But 3 names is different and a little harder to explain. This young woman had also been stabbed 9 times in the chest and the back, and the murder weapon, a kitchen knife, had been left at the scene, which we do not often see. The victim had no form of identification on her person. The most distinctive thing about her was the belt buckle that she was wearing. It was shaped like a silver buffalo nickel, and the medical examiner determined that she'd most likely been killed 6 to 8 weeks before her body was discovered. And I want to talk quickly about eye color, because this comes up in a lot of cases where a person's found dead, but they have no identification. And I've always been curious about it, so I finally looked it up. You know, when there's a Jane or John Doe, they never really give their eye color, and this is for a specific reason. Most people die with their eyes open, and when the whites of the eyes start to dry out, they begin to turn blue or gray, and this is called tache noir. So the actual eye color of a person doesn't really change, but a hazy film develops over the iris of the eye, and that makes the eye appear to be bluish or gray, and it makes it very difficult to determine what color the person's eyes were in life. Additionally, after death, a person's pupils will become enlarged as the body releases and loses oxygen, and this also makes eye color tough to distinguish. So obviously, in a case like this, when you have a murder victim that you can't identify, the first order of business is to figure out who this person was, because the police can't investigate a crime until they can figure out who the victim was, what their life was like, who they were in contact with, etc. In the days and weeks after the discovery of this woman, who became nicknamed Bossier Doe, there was a lot of media coverage on the case. Stories were printed in the local papers, there were news broadcasts on local radio and television, and news stations wired information about the case to their affiliates in other cities and other states. So the story spread pretty quickly, and tips began to come in. Lamar Breedlove, who was the lead investigator at the time, told the Shreveport Times in February of 1981 that he'd received multiple calls about this woman's possible identity, and some of these calls had come in from as far away as Michigan, but most of them were from the Shreveport and Bossier areas. The sheriff's department also forwarded thumbprints to the FBI, and physical characteristics of local missing persons were checked against those of this unidentified victim until finally 13 potential matches had been found. 7 of them were eliminated fairly quickly, which left 6 profiles of missing people that could possibly be Bossier Doe. The dental records of these 6 people were sent to the office of forensic pathologist Dr. George McCormick, who was the Bossier County medical examiner at that time. But according to George McCormick, none of these 6 were a match for their Jane Doe. Now, something interesting about Bossier Jane Doe was her teeth. They had a residue on them that was used for bonding orthodontics. So this is a glue that's placed on your teeth when you get braces. Now, if you were getting your braces off the traditional way by going to your orthodontist office, it's a process that usually takes about an hour because the orthodontist uses a scraper or a polish to remove the glue from your teeth. But that had not happened in this situation. The bonding substance, the glue, was still on her teeth, which led the medical examiner, George McCormick, to believe that this victim had removed her braces all on her own. Once all 13 potential profiles had been ruled out, the case came to a standstill within just a few months of her body being found. Dr. George McCormick, the medical examiner, told the Shreveport Bossier Times that he didn't know why the police department had not sent him any more possibilities to rule out. And he stated that he found it professionally hard to believe that there weren't more people reported missing for him to compare against their Jane Doe. This article said, quote, McCormick, who chooses his words carefully because he does not wish to ruffle feathers in the sheriff's office, says the reason for the case not being solved may be because the department is not actively pushing the case, end quote. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it's going to be important and ironic later. Lamar Breedlove, the lead investigator, he countered this, and he claimed that the police department was doing all they could with what little they had to go on. But he did admit that in the beginning, they'd thought the case was going to be a lot easier to solve. Investigators had followed up on 2 pieces of evidence that were distinctive, the buffalo nickel belt buckle and the shoes. But when they checked local retail establishments, they found that none of them sold the belt buckle. And when they checked out the names on the shoes, that didn't pan out either. But Lamar Breedlove does not specify if they ever found the people whose names were written on the shoes. Breedlove said, quote, "The only thing we know about her is that she was in Louisiana long enough to buy a pack of Marlboros," end quote. And he's referring to a pack of cigarettes that were found on Bogiardo's body that had a Louisiana stamp on them. Due to her unusual dental work and the fact that no one locally had reported her missing, Breedlove believed this indicated the woman was not from the area. Without any leads to go on, the police needed to figure out a way to get more information out on their Jane Doe, information that was specific enough to hopefully bring in more tips that would actually lead to her identity. If people could see what she looked like, it would be more likely that someone would recognize her. But this Jane Doe had been found several weeks after her death. And with the humidity and the heat of Louisiana, her body had decomposed very quickly and very much. So they had no idea what she looked like. In 1984, the skull of Bogiardo traveled to Baton Rouge, where Dr. Douglas Owsley, an LSU anthropology professor, worked with a sculptor, and he used her skull in order to create a 3-dimensional clay reconstruction of what her face may have looked like. And this was the first time that law enforcement agencies in Northwest Louisiana had used this technique of modeling an unknown person's face based on their skull. And I can't find a picture of this first attempt to reconstruct her face. But there was a second attempt less than a year later by forensic pathologist Dr. William Rodriguez, who specialized in skeleton work or skeletal work. And this model was rough, okay? So I know that this was the 80s and this kind of stuff was new and, it was like innovative and they're just trying new things out. But I would have definitely gone back to the drawing board with this one. It was real bad. It wasn't good. I want to go home. So at this point, and for a long time many years after, this facial reconstruction would be the only, physical characteristics that people had to go on, that law enforcement had to go on, that the public had to go on. And they actually put a picture of this thing in the paper and then, wanted people to tell them if they'd ever seen anybody who looked like this. I hope that nobody ever saw anybody who looked like this reconstruction clay model. I hope nobody will ever see somebody if you see somebody like that, who looks like that, run. So I know when some of you think about claymation, you think about, more current movies like Nightmare Before Christmas, Coraline, things like that. But if you remember old school 80s claymation, it's the stuff of nightmares. So I'm actually going to see if I can find a little clip of what I'm talking about, and I'll show it to you, and then you'll look at this clay model that they made of her, and you'll see that they're very similar. But it's the stuff of nightmares. It's terrifying. So I don't like it.
Mr. Joy, close the door. Mr. Joy, close the door.
In April of 1984, infamous serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to murdering this young woman, Bogiardo, claiming that he didn't know much about her besides that she went by the nickname of Muffin. I feel like we talk about this dude, Henry Lee Lucas, in every single Jane Doe case that we cover. And it's just so extra because this dude could not stop himself from being evil and ruining lives, even from behind bars. Usually when these guys go to prison, that's our chance. That's our reward for having to live in the same world with them, and we get to forget about them, But people like Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole and Chris Watts, they can't just go to prison and go away and just dissolve from our reality. They have to keep letting us know that they're still there. By the time that Henry Lee Lucas confessed to this murder, he'd already confessed to 360 others, but he actually led police to the area where he claimed to have left the body, and it was the same place she'd been found, right? Mind blown, must be him. No, the location had been heavily publicized, as I said, in the papers, on television, the radio, all of which Henry Lee Lucas had access to in prison.
I had everything I wanted, everything possible that a man could want. I had money I didn't have before. I had a colored television I didn't have before. I had cable TV, and I didn't have that before. I had all kinds of food, even stacks of cigarettes in cartons in my house. That's coming from nothing.
So he would see these news reports, right? He'd get the information he needed, and then he'd confess to a murder he didn't commit so that he could get a little field trip out of prison, and maybe the cops would get him a Big Mac while they were out and about.
Every case I would go out on for them, they would automatically pick up the telephone and call the news media, tell them that I'd solved 4 or 5 cases that day. So the news media would come running,
How do you feel?
Like I did today.
Like what?
Same as I did today.
What do you predict tomorrow?
It was interview after interview. I couldn't turn around unless it was an interview. And I started staying on TV 24 hours a day. It changed me. And I got so that I thought I was the biggest movie star in this country.
Lucas claimed he'd picked her up while she was hitchhiking along Interstate 35 north of Dallas. He said that he'd driven her to Louisiana, where he then stabbed her and cut her throat. In early May of 1984, a Bossier Parish grand jury actually indicted Henry Lee Lucas for this murder, as well as for the 1978 murder of 48-year-old Dolly Dermond. The jury had viewed a 2.5-hour videotape of Lucas confessing to and describing the murders, and around the same time, Henry Lee Lucas also claimed that he had converted to Christianity, which he said had compelled him to work with law enforcement to close some of his unsolved murders. He said that he felt remorse for his crimes, and he felt badly for the families of his victims, but he could not guarantee that he wouldn't take more lives if he was released. In my opinion, that was just bullshit. Not the part about him taking more lives if he was released. I guarantee you, I completely 100% believe that. But the reason that he confessed to so many crimes was so that he could get a temporary get-out-of-jail-free card. But also, I feel there was a part of him that just wanted to impede the investigation and have law enforcement close these cases so that the real murderers would never be caught. He probably thought it was his duty, as part of the serial killer brotherhood, to allow as many murderers as possible to continue to walk free and commit their evil deeds. But that's just my opinion. Don't come for me. After this, the case went cold. In 2005, most of the evidence that had been collected in the case was destroyed when the facility that the evidence was stored in caught on fire. So it was really not looking good. It was looking as if the identity of this young woman would never be revealed. But 10 years later, in 2015, Lieutenant Shannon Mack, a detective with the Bossier Parish Cold Case Unit, decided to think outside the box. Lieutenant Mack had taken over the case in September of 2014, and she was getting frustrated. They now had a full DNA profile of Bossier Doe, and the cold case team had gone through and tried to match her to missing women in the system using the DNA. But they had come up with nothing. Mack felt strongly that Henry Lee Lucas had not been the killer of this woman, since it was a known fact that he'd been in Florida at the time. And to be fair, I don't really think that anybody truly believed that Henry Lee Lucas had done this murder or, several others. I think they were just like, whatever, let's just move on. On February 6th, 2015, Lieutenant Mack started a Facebook page dedicated to finding out who Bossier Doe was, and within a week, the page had more than 1,000 followers, and the tips started coming in. Now, one of these tips sent investigators to the new Bethany home for girls in Arcadia, and Arcadia is a rural area off of Louisiana Highway 9. Now, let's talk about this new Bethany home for girls for a moment, because it's a terrifying story that I could make an entire video about. This place was marketed as a boarding school for troubled girls, and its residents included those who'd been sent there by a court order, as well as those who had been left there by parents and guardians. Some were just runaways that got brought in by law enforcement. They were coming from all over the place. The founder of the home was a man named Mac Ford, who claimed that he was inspired to build New Bethany after meeting a set of blonde twins who had been impregnated by their alcoholic father. Mac Ford was a former high school dropout turned independent fundamentalist Baptist preacher, and he opened the New Bethany home at the site of a former penal colony 50 miles east of Shreveport. This place had only been opened and functioning for 4 years before Ford's troubles with the law started. In December of 1975, Mac Ford was arrested on 4 counts of aggravated assault with a dangerous weapon after the Bienville Parish Sheriff received a report that a New Bethany employee had fired a shotgun in the back of a car that was carrying 4 young boys, while driving on a road that cut through the compound, and the compound is the New Bethany home. Witnesses told police that they'd seen Ford himself arrive on the scene after the 4 young men had gotten out of the car, and these 4 young men had attempted to run to safety. So Ford pulls up in his car, his vehicle, and he got out of the car holding a rifle. Now, there's a lot more to this story, but like I said, I can't go too deep into it, but I'll put links in the description box and you can find all of this online. In 1980, the Louisiana Department of Health and Human Resources tried to get the school shut down after Ford refused to allow a state inspection and a licensing. A district judge ended up ruling that the state did not have the authority to shut the school down. Now, there was also a New Bethany home for boys that Ford had opened in Longstreet, Louisiana. And in May of 1981, the manager of that home, a man named L.D. Rapier, he was arrested and charged with cruelty to children after 4 boys who'd run away from the home claimed that they'd been beaten. Mac Ford defended his employee, Mr. Rapier, and he claimed that his school was being harassed by the outside world, that these 4 boys should not and could not be trusted, and that at the school they used old-fashioned methods of discipline. The charges against Rapier were dropped, and the boys' school closed soon after, but it was relocated to Walterboro, South Carolina, so it didn't really close, did it? In June of 1983, a former resident of the New Bethany girls' home sent a letter to the police and the governor of Louisiana saying that in her 2 years at the school, she'd witnessed many incidences of abuse. A few months later, in August, the Bienville Parish Sheriff told the media that the school was like a little penitentiary. In May of 1984, authorities found a 14-year-old boy sleeping in a windowless, padlocked cell at the New Bethany Boys' School that's now in North Carolina, and he'd been there for several days. The school was closed, and 37 students were taken into protective custody. 2 employees were charged with unlawful neglect of a child and conspiracy to commit unlawful neglect, as well as kidnapping. Now, these 2 employees ended up pleading no contest to a single lesser charge of false imprisonment. In September of 1986, Mac Ford opened the New Bethany Church Boarding Academy in the same building that the closed school had occupied in South Carolina, and Ford was found in contempt by a judge who claimed that he'd been admitting residential students under the new name against a court order. So basically, like, we told you to shut the school down, you reopened the school, called it something else, and now you're taking in residents or, kids, and you're not supposed to be doing that. But then nothing happened, right? The judge was like, you're not supposed to be doing that. But then nothing happened. Ford didn't go to jail. He didn't get shut down. He didn't even get fined. He was just allowed to keep on keeping on. In June of 1988, 28 students were removed from the girls' home in Arcadia after complaints of abuse. According to court documents, 47 girls were interviewed, and they produced information that supported allegations of abuse, extreme emotional abuse, and threat of further harm or injury.
I want Mac Ford to spend the rest of his life in prison. I want him to admit the things that he did to all of us.
I need to know if something happens, you guys are going to continue this on. If I can't go to trial, you guys are going to continue and stand in my behalf. I asked him to take me to the bathroom. He had never touched me before. You filthy little whore. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I can't believe you're making me do this. As he was unbuttoning his pants, I could hear everybody in the church still in the background. I could hear everybody. I remember telling him I just wanted my mom. I said, I want my mom.
The state conducted 2 raids at the home in 1988 and 1996, removing children from the campus. But the home was never permanently shut down by state officials or law enforcement. No one at the home, including founder and minister Mac Ford, was ever prosecuted in connection with the abuse.
He wanted to control everything, and he did it through fear. And the sad part about it is it worked for so many years.
I can recall every time I've been hit, but I can't recall every time I was raped. It happened on the compound. It happened in his house, the school, the cafeteria.
On the bus, so me in the van, in his car, and he kept telling me, you need this, I smell, you need this. And I just wish that those people that are sitting out in that congregation and he's preaching hell, fire, and brimstone would realize he just got through screwing a little girl. Now how do you feel about him?
Mac Ford denied this abuse, but he admitted that they did use a wooden paddle for their old-fashioned discipline. The next month, the state's social services director signed an affidavit saying that he had reasonable cause to believe children had been abused and that male residents were hidden prior to investigators arriving at the home. And then in May of 1989, Mac Ford filed a federal lawsuit against the state requesting a permanent order to keep government officials from interfering in New Bethany operations. Wouldn't you have really liked that, Mac Ford? In late 1991, a 20-year-old woman named Shannon sat down with the wife of Mac Ford, and her name was Thelma Ford. So Shannon had been at the home for 5 years. She'd been there since she was 15, and she sat down with Thelma to tell her in a conversation that was allegedly recorded that Mac Ford had forced her to have sexual contact with him against her will. According to Shannon, 3 days after this, she was handed a plane ticket and told to go home. And a few days later, on January 8th, 1992, the Associated Press reported that the New Bethany Home for Girls was closing its doors, citing the reason for this closure as a reorganization of the board of directors. Now, one of the members of this board of directors was Mac Ford's son-in-law, a man named Timothy Johnson, who was the vice president of Louisiana College. It has been reported that this man, Timothy Johnson, who has some scandals amongst the one we're talking about now, he knew what was happening at the home and he'd gotten reports before and he didn't do anything about it. Now, he says that he did do something about it. Them closing the school and sending everybody home was what he did about it. And he also claims that he had gone to the girls in the school and asked, are these allegations true? Is there anything to these allegations? If somebody has something to report or say, you can come forward and do it. And he claims that nobody did. But it's just funny because he was the vice president of Louisiana College and he's involved with somebody like Mac Ford. Thelma Ford, Mac Ford's wife, was quoted as saying, "After 21 years, everyone needs a break." But she did not mention Shannon. She didn't mention Shannon's claims of sexual abuse. It was just like, we just kind of need a little break to reorganize everything, and it was very hush-hush. But by the mid-90s, the home was back up and running, and its residents were back to running away and reporting to the police about abusive and inhumane living conditions. The home finally closed for good in 2001, but over the years, several former residents have come forward complaining about multiple forms of abuse, including physical and sexual. In 2014, 4 women testified in front of a grand jury about this abuse at the hands of Mac Ford and his employees, but due to statute of limitations issues, the court declined to indict. So this place was literally like a prison and a cult, all wrapped up in one. It was surrounded by high barbed wire fencing. Some former residents said that the fencing was electric, like electric fence. They would get shocked if they touched it. The opportunity to interact with outsiders was incredibly limited. It was always chaperoned. They always kind of went on these field trips where the girls would sing and Mac Ford would speak about the incredible work he was doing, but they were never really allowed to talk with people from the outside. Calls going out of the compound were limited to just a few minutes a month, and many who lived there believed that their calls were being monitored. And law enforcement, as well as people who just lived in this area, were very used to seeing runaways from the home all the time. One resident told investigators that her head was slammed repeatedly into a wall while Ford's wife, Thelma, stood and watched. Another former resident claimed that when she'd first arrived to the home, she'd been ordered by Mac to take off her jewelry, and she'd refused. So Mac Ford himself had hit her in the face repeatedly over and over again until she did what she was told. Another claimed that when she refused to eat peas, a staff member tackled her to the floor and shoved the peas into her mouth, and when she spit them out, they were shoved back into her mouth over and over again until she started to gag on them. So this is a really bad place, allegedly. And there's so much more that I don't even have time to get into, but it's crazy. When the police got a tip claiming that their Jane Doe may have been a resident at the New Bethany home, Lieutenant Shannon Mack reached out to other young women who'd been staying there at the time. Former resident Simone Jones, who'd been at the home from 1981 to 1984 before scaling the fence to escape, she said that she remembered the girls were required to write their names on their shoes and their clothes with markers. And remember that Bossier Doe had these shoes on, these tennis shoes, that had 3 names written on them. Teresa Fry, who'd been at the New Bethany home for girls in 1982, said that she remembered the people at New Bethany had made her remove her braces far before her own orthodontist had recommended that she should remove them, and she felt that this was because they wanted to have less medical expenses to deal with while she was there. And remember that Bossier Jane Doe had this glue left on her teeth, and the medical examiner, George McCormick, had thought it was because she'd taken off her braces by herself, so no orthodontist had been there to remove the glue. Ironically enough, just 4 days after the police started looking into New Bethany to see if there was a possible connection between the home for girls and their Jane Doe, Mac Ford was found dead inside his home from what is believed to have been a heart attack. Apparently, he was still living at the site of the shut-down girls' school. A photo had surfaced of a girl at New Bethany from the 80s, and she seemed to resemble the facial reconstruction of Bossier Doe, but Lieutenant Mack doesn't think that there is a connection because she says she went to New Bethany and she went through 6 or 7 boxes of records looking for an indication that Bossier Jane Doe had ever been there, and she didn't find one. So as the police were looking into the New Bethany home, another tip came in through Facebook. A 911 operator in Louisiana who was homesick with bronchitis, she was surfing the internet, she's bored, she's homesick, and she came upon 2 separate things. She found the Facebook page for Bossier Doe, and she also found a Craigslist ad for a missing girl from Kalamazoo, Michigan named Carol Ann Cole. So the same day, at the same time, this woman is surfing the internet. She's a 911 operator. Maybe she's into true crime. Maybe things are being suggested to her. And she happens to run into these 2 things, the Facebook page and the Craigslist ad. And so she's like, I wonder if there's a connection, She thought that maybe Carol Ann Cole looked a little bit like Bossier Doe and had the same hair color, had the same, height and age. So she messaged the Facebook page and she sent the link to the Craigslist ad. Carol Ann Cole had been born on November 5th, 1963 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Her parents were Daniel and Sue Cole, and she had a younger sister named Jeannie. When their parents divorced, Carol and Jeannie lived with their grandmother. Jeannie said that she and Carol were very close. They were best friends, but when their mother, Sue, left Louisiana in 1979, she took 15-year-old Carol with her, and that was the last time that Jeannie saw her sister. The 2 kept in constant contact. They talked almost every single day, and Carol wrote to Jeannie and her grandmother regularly. Carol and her mother settled in Austin, Texas, and for a while, everything was fine. They had a good relationship, there was no issues, But then Sue claims that her daughter Carol started acting out. Carol was skipping school. She was hanging out with the wrong people. One of these people was a girl named Diane, who I believe lived a floor up from them. Sue said that the girls began sneaking out at night after everyone was asleep and they were meeting up with boys. So in May of 1980, Sue placed her daughter in a girls' home that was run by the Palmer Drug Abuse Program. Apparently, Sue would visit Carol there, and Carol continued calling her sister and her grandmother and writing letters. But the following October, Carol ran away from the girls' home and somehow ended up in Louisiana. Between October and December, no one heard from Carol, and we don't know what she was doing, but she did resume communication with her sister and grandmother in December of 1980. She made a few phone calls that were traced back to Shreveport, Louisiana. One of the calls was placed from a house on Howell Street, and another was from an address in the 6800 block of Fairfield. Carol told her grandmother that she was babysitting for some people in the area, and this was the last time that Carol called. It was the last time that Jeannie and her grandmother heard from Carol. So the DNA of Bossier Doe was compared to that of Carol Cole's mother, Sue, and they were a match. Bossier Doe was Carol Ann Cole, and her grandmother and her sister had been looking for her since they'd lost contact with her. Now, 2 weeks before Carol's body was found in 1981, her grandmother had called local law enforcement, reporting her granddaughter missing and letting officers know that she was last known to be in the area of Shreveport. And this is why I was talking about irony in regards to the medical examiner, Dr. George McCormick, telling the press that the reason their Jane Doe hadn't been identified yet was because the police weren't giving him enough people to compare her to. Once Carol Cole was known to be Bossier Doe, the sheriff, Bill Davis, confirmed to KSLA News 12 that her name had been on that initial list of names, the ones that the police had given to George McCormick, people who were missing that he could compare. But apparently her name was excluded from the list. By who? George McCormick, who said there were multiple differences between Carol and their Jane Doe. He died in 2005, sadly, thoughts to his family, but we can't ask him what those differences were. But a lot of people are really curious about what those differences could have been, since, this was the same person, right? The hair color matched, the height and weight matched, the age would have matched, and one more detail which had stood out to the ME and law enforcement from very early on had also stood out. The fact that she had this bonding substance on her teeth, the glue that is used for braces. But if the braces had been taken off in an orthodontist office, the glue would have been cleaned off her teeth. Carol Ann Cole had braces, and Carol's mother, Sue, told detectives that her daughter had removed her own braces after they had left Michigan and before Carol had run away from the home that Sue had put her in. And Carol's sister, Jeannie, had also heard that Carol had taken off her own braces, I guess in letters from Carol. And the worst part is, for me at least, that even though DNA testing wasn't available at this time, they could have compared dental records of the Jane Doe to those of Carol Cole, and there would have been a match, but according to Lieutenant Mack from the Cold Case Department, it doesn't appear that this was ever done. So while McCormick was complaining to the papers that the police weren't giving him enough potential profiles to rule out, he wasn't even adequately investigating the profiles he did have. So you dropped the ball, dude. I think it's safe to say that although Henry Lee Lucas confessed to this murder and he was indicted for it, he most likely did not commit it because he wasn't even in the state at the time. So if not Henry Lee Lucas, then who? There are several other theories that Lieutenant Shannon Mack has been looking into besides the New Bethany home, since it was never proven that Carol spent time there, but my thoughts are going out to whoever had to spend any time there. The hard part is, though, the home that Sue Cole put Carol in, she can't remember exactly where this place was or what it was called. Right? She does remember being told shortly before Carol's 17th birthday in the first week of November that her daughter had run away from the home. There was also apparently a boyfriend in the picture, although the detectives do not know his name or who he was, but it was reported by Carol's sister, Jeannie Phelps, that Carol had written to her about having problems with this man, saying that he'd been mistreating her. Also, due to the location that Carol was found on that isolated mining road near some oil fields right on the oil pipeline, Lieutenant Shannon Mack wonders if Carol might have encountered one of the workers on the pipeline. There's even a possibility she could have met with someone who was working at a traveling fair that was going through that area in October. The most plausible theory, however, brings us right back to the moment that Carol Ann Cole's body was discovered. If you remember, there was a man hunting with his 2 children, and he'd discovered the body and called the police. That man was named John Cheshin, and the 2 kids that he was with, his 2 children, were his son, John Jr., and his 13-year-old daughter, Frances Aquan. When Carol Cole's identity was revealed, Frances Aquan, who at that time was in her late 40s, saw the picture on Facebook and recognized Carol as a young woman who had stayed with her family in the early 80s. Frances told investigators that she vividly remembered picking up a female hitchhiker in Shreveport. She and her father had just made a trip to the local scrapyard when he pulled over to pick up this young woman that Frances now believes was Carol.
I just remember picking her up. I think I was like age of 13. She was on the side of the road. We stopped and pick her up. I remember getting in the middle of the truck, her getting in.
Frances remembers having to scoot over into the middle seat of the truck so that Carol could get in. She remembers that Carol had a purse or a bag with her, and she remembers that they all drove back to their mobile home where Carol ended up staying for a short time, actually sleeping in bed with Frances. Frances says she remembers that Carol was sweet. She didn't talk much, but one day when Frances got home from school, Carol was gone, and Frances was told that relatives had come to get her. But this young woman had left all of her things behind, right? Her purse, her clothes, and Frances remembered thinking, why would she leave but not bring her things with her? A week passed, and then 2 weeks, and then a month, when all of a sudden her father, John, told his kids they were going on a hunting trip. And according to Frances, this was odd in itself because he and her brother often went hunting, but they never brought her hunting. Frances now believes that her father, John Chesson, not only killed Carol Cole, but then led his children to her body and told them exactly where to walk so that she could be discovered.
Frances Aquan was 13 when she and her older brother discovered the body in the woods not far from where they lived with their father, John Chesson, and their mom. That was in January 1981. Their dad, she says, had taken them out hunting, something she had never done before, and he told them exactly where to walk.
He stopped and said, okay, will y'all get out? I want y'all to walk this way, and I'm going to stay on the road and go this way. We weren't too far into the woods when we stumbled upon her.
A fully clothed skeleton, partially covered in leaves. They both screamed. Police say she had been stabbed at least 9 times.
I look back, he's still on the road looking at us.
She is convinced her dad sent them back there to find the body.
Frances said, quote, I believe he led us there to clear his conscience, end quote. Well, obviously, since they were the ones who found the body, police were going to want to question them. But when they got there, John Chesson told police that the kids had not been with him when the discovery had been made, that it was just him. Because later, Lieutenant Shannon Mack said she didn't even know that Frances had been at the site when Carol's body had been discovered. But when the police officers showed up to question John, he told Frances to stay in her room and not say one word. And she did this because she was afraid of him. Frances said that her father had threatened her with a knife before. He'd even stabbed her in the back once. Frances said, quote, he used to hold knives to my throat, puncture me with them, beat me, throw me in closets, feed me off the floor, throw me naked outside, end quote. And get this, when Carol Cole is identified in 2015, John Chesson was already serving life in prison for the second-degree murder of his estranged wife's mother in 1997. According to court documents, John Chesson woke up on the morning of February 17, 1997, and wrote a letter to his estranged wife. Both Frances and John's other daughter, Ruby, testified that he informed them that morning that he'd dreamed about the devil, and the devil had told him to kill someone, and then he left the house. Now, according to their testimony, both Frances and Ruby then called a priest to have the house blessed, but apparently they did not call the police to tell them that their father was on a killing mission given to him by Satan. Who knows? Maybe they didn't think he'd actually do it. Maybe they didn't believe him. Maybe he often said crazy things like that. But I feel like when someone says something like that, you probably should call someone. After this, John went to the home of Lucindy Thibodeau and asked where her daughter was. His wife, his estranged wife, was her daughter. And Lucindy claimed that she didn't know where her daughter was, and she asked John to leave. And this was at about 9 a.m. John did leave, but Lucindy was frightened, so she called her daughter and her son, and she also called the police and asked them to send someone. But when the police arrived, not long after, they found Lucindy lying in a pool of blood, stabbed to death. John Chesson denied having been there that morning at first, but later he admitted that he had gone to see her and that he had hurt her, but he didn't think that he'd hurt her too badly. So we have a woman who's stabbed to death in the same way that Carol Cole had been stabbed to death. Additionally, the kitchen knife that had killed Carol had been left at the scene. And this kitchen knife was familiar to John's daughter, Frances Kwan. It was a knife she'd often seen in her childhood home, sitting on the kitchen counter. And it was also a knife she believed her father had once put to her throat. Lieutenant Shannon Mack went to interview John Chesson in prison. He denied having committed the crime or having even picked Carol up, claiming that he did pick up hitchhikers sometimes, but he never had picked up hitchhikers in Shreveport. Lieutenant Mack did have Frances take her to the place that she remembered her father picking the hitchhiker up, and it was very close to one of the locations that Carol made a phone call from before she lost contact with her family. And additionally, the scrapyard that John Chesson often used or was known to use was also close to one of these locations that Carol had last made a phone call from. Now, the people who occupied the residences currently, they have been talked to, but those who would have been adults living there in 1981 have since passed away, and the remaining family members claim that it wouldn't have been odd to have someone come through to babysit or live in their houses briefly, but they do not remember Carol Cole specifically. John Chesson has since died in prison, and his son, John Jr., who was the only other person there besides Frances when Carol's body was found, he committed suicide in 2008. So in the end, we're never really going to know what happened to 17-year-old Carol Ann Cole. But we do know that she had people who loved her and who wanted her. She had a grandmother who had been looking for her, who'd been calling around and reporting her missing in areas that Carol could have potentially been. Carol also had a sister who she was so close to that this sister never rested and continued searching the abyss for a sister she hadn't heard from in over 30 years. I do think that it's highly likely that Carol's killer was John Chesson, unless Frances Kwan is lying about virtually everything, and I really can't see a motive for her to do that. She seems genuinely convinced that her father did this, that her father killed Carol Cole, and she feels incredibly guilty that it took so long for her to come forward and tell the truth. But we do have to remember that if what she's saying is true, Frances was an extremely abused child who would have been conditioned to be in fear for her life every day, all the time. So she wouldn't have stepped out of line or gone against her father's demands. She would have kept quiet. She wouldn't have said a word. I mean, he would have hurt her if she didn't. Additionally, we have an issue that while there was a lot of evidence at the scene, right? We've got the kitchen knife found at the scene of the crime. We've got the men's boxer briefs that Carol was wearing. Those boxer briefs could have been John Chesson's. That kitchen knife could have had John Chesson's fingerprints or DNA on it. This is 1981, so a person committing a crime isn't going to be taking all the precautions to avoid getting his DNA on a murder weapon. But a lot of evidence was destroyed in that fire in 2005. So the motive for John to kill Carol is a mysterious one that will also most likely remain a mystery since he denied killing her when he was alive, so he never gave a reason. And these Jane and John Doe cases can be very frustrating for this exact reason. It's taken so long for DNA technology to develop. So many of these unidentified victims are being given their names back, which is great. And their loved ones are being given the chance to lay them to rest where they belong, which is also great. But the why is still there, since usually so many years have gone by, the perpetrator is usually no longer alive to question and to bring to justice. So while they're identifying these unidentified bodies and they're identifying their killers or their attackers, most of these people who committed the crime back in 1981 or 1970 or 1950, they're not alive anymore. So they can't tell us why. And it leaves so much unknown. And I know a lot of people might say, why is the why important, Stephanie? Why is the why important? And it depends on how your brain works. If you just like to know the who, then that's fine. But if you like to know the who, the why, the what, the where, the when, the how, which is how my brain works, it's frustrating because I think that it's so important to get this kind of data when you're talking about these crimes. You want to know. It seems senseless to us, but there was a reason. It made sense to the person who committed the crime. So we want to know why it made sense to them, what their process of thought was. And hopefully we can identify these kinds of people a lot sooner before they take so many lives, before they take even one life, if we can figure out how their brains work and why the unthinkable to us is completely doable for them. Let me know what you guys think about this case in the comment section. I am going to put a lot of links in this video, so for the New Bethany home especially, so that you guys can kind of check that out if you want to research it further. It's just a mess. I can't believe these places were allowed to function and operate for so long. It's just ridiculous. Make sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Make sure to follow my podcast, Crime Weekly, that I co-host every week with Derek Lavasser, who's a retired police detective. New episodes go up every single Friday. Like this video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you are subscribed, make sure you still are subscribed, because YouTube likes to unsubscribe people from my channel all the time. It's a fact, indisputable. You can't call me a liar.
This horse isn't from here, Abby. You can't be calling me a liar. I've got papers in this page.
I hope everybody's having an amazing day, an amazing week so far. Stay kind, stay beautiful, and stay safe. And I'll see you soon. Bye.
Well, the levee don't break now, and the bottle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. Oh, this feeling's out of baby, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say I Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood.